Hello, this is week 5, and this week we get into the nitty-gritty of cognitive development. We start out at the beginning, oral language development, because babies begin babbling very early on, and that's the beginning of it all, the beginning of the literacy piece. So let me share my screen so you can see what I'm looking at. Okay, so this language development in infants is so profound and so important. I'd really like you to click on this TED Talk by Dr. Patricia Kuhl. She is an expert on how babies acquire language, and it's so interesting to hear her talk about all the studies she's done on children all around the world and how they acquire language. So interesting, highly recommended. Okay, then let's take a look at language development. You've got two different kinds of language development. You've got receptive language, and then after that, you've got your expressive language. But we're going to talk about receptive language first, because it develops first. And that's just the ability to understand words, the meanings of words that are said around and to us. And children, from the time they're about 3 years old, they're able to follow two-part requests, put your pajamas on or put them in the hamper. They're learning new words very quickly. They actually understand the concept of two-ness, which is interesting. They understand the difference between girls and boys. However, to them, it's basically just the outside that they're looking at. They'll say to you, oh, she's a girl because she has long hair, or he's a boy because his hair is short. That's what they base it on at that age. And they do know it says their full name, but I'd be happy if they knew their first name. Some of them may know their full name, but not necessarily. By the time they're 4 and you get them in your pre-K class, they are learning the names of their colors. They may not know them all yet, and that's totally okay. And they understand that there's a difference between things that are the same and things that are different. This is where the cognitive development goes into sorting. By the time they're 5, they come up with relationships between objects. So those are very important strands of cognitive development. When children have a problem with receptive language, they might be inattentive at group time because they're not able to comprehend what you're saying. They're not able to understand it. They may not follow instructions that you've given because, again, they could not understand them. They may respond to your questions by repeating your question to you instead of giving you an answer. They find it very difficult to sit and listen at group time when you're reading a story because they do not understand it. And like they gave unusual answers to questions. So if you have children, you will all have children that have receptive issues. You will want to make sure you engage them well, make eye contact before you give them instructions, and limit the number of instructions to 1 step at a time. That's it, just 1 step. Simplify the language you use, make your sentence short and use words that are quite common. Describe to the child what they're doing when they're doing it, like you're putting your toys in the box, because that gives them something to focus on. Aha, this is what the meaning of this sentence is. You might try emphasizing the word that you want the child to learn about when you're speaking. I need you to put away the toys. Reduce your background noise as much as possible to reduce distractions, and that can be really hard. These kinds of things come up in a pre-K classroom, and pre-K classrooms are a little bit noisy. And but try to keep it down. I know in some classrooms, they've got music going pretty loudly. you might try toning that piece down a little bit so it's not so overwhelming for a child that's still having receptive issues. And it's really a great idea to use visuals, signs, or pictures to help with understanding. Anytime you can have an object to illustrate what the item is that you're talking about, or at least a photo, that makes a big difference. So now let's look at expressive language. Expressive language is when children actually talk, when you hear them talk. Receptive, they're taking this in. Expressive, they are expressing themselves. And this happens, they start right around 1 by saying a few words like mama, dada, and so on and so forth. And really by the time they're 2, they're talking to a certain extent, but not necessarily. Not all 2-year-olds talk. Sometimes it's 3 or a little bit beyond 3 before they talk. That is really common. And if it goes beyond that, obviously children need to be evaluated to see if there's a hearing deficit or some other issue in play. By the time you have your 3-year-olds, they're beginning to use plurals, not accurately, of course, because you hear all kinds of S's added to the end of words like deers and fishes. They're asked why. Everything is why. And they may use complete sentences. 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds, and you can read this on your own, are even more developed. The thing I want you to make sure you know what's basically average for your expressive language as well as receptive language development, because there are questions on the ECED that ask specific pieces on language development. Make sure you know it. All right. If a child has difficulty, and you will have kids in your class who have difficulty with expressive language, they'll have problems naming things and objects. Even though you have told them what it is, they'll still have difficulty. They'll have difficulty linking words together to make a full sentence. They might make up words. They'll have sentences that are so muddled, you're not sure what they're saying. Unfortunately, maybe only mom or dad can understand what they're saying, and strangers have a great deal of difficulty. It's very hard on the teacher who's trying to translate a sentence if she can't understand it. They'll have a lot of difficulty retelling a story, and even difficulty writing paragraphs and stories as they get older. So what can you do to help children that have expressive language issues? Give them a lot of choices so they're encouraged to use words rather than allowing them to make a gesture. A lot of times these kids have older siblings, and the older siblings, their entire life have answered for them. They know exactly what they want. So if you ask Junior what he wants, his older sister's like, Junior wants such and such. Well, you know what? Junior's not motivated to learn how to say anything. He doesn't have to say anything because, by golly, his sister speaks for him. So don't let that happen in your classroom. Say, do you want the red crayon or the green crayon? And do not let them point. Say, nope, I need you to say, no pointing. Engage the child in playing games where you model new words and phrases, look at picture books together, and talk about what you see. Ask them questions, open-ended questions that can't be answered with a or a lot of times kids who do not talk will sing. So have a lot of music in your classroom. Sing with the kids. Have experience stories where each child adds to the story orally as you write it down. That's an experience story. So in the end, you can choral read it together. Or you can have children look at picture books and dictate to you what captions that they would like to add for the picture, so they can actually write a whole story. All ways to help children that have expressive language difficulties. And some children do have language delays. It's a true communication disorder. It may be due to hearing issues. I know all children are tested for hearing when they're born. However, some children are perfectly normal in their hearing when they're born, and yet when they get to be about 2 or 3, they have severe hearing issues due to repeated ear infections and lots of gunk that's caught up behind the ear drum that just muffles the sound. So that's something for you, the teacher, to identify if you notice that they just seem to be having some hearing issues, and mention to the caretakers. One of the other issues that oftentimes early childhood teachers help parents find is some autism, if they're on the spectrum, because many times if they are autistic to a certain degree, they're going to have some kind of a communication issue. Also, communication issues can be due to intellectual disabilities. It can be due to psychosocial issues such as severe neglect. Lots and lots of causes. If you have a child in your pre-K classroom who's having difficulty, obviously, with understanding language and expressing themselves in oral language, this is the time when you meet with the family and say, I am noticing such and such. Have you noticed this as well? And if it's a family this is their first child and they're just not sure of child development, they may say, well, we saw it, but we didn't know if it was normal or not. And then you might say to them, well, I have concerns about that. You don't have to tell them what you think. Just tell them I have some concerns because I've noticed such and such. And I really highly recommend that you take Junior to be evaluated as his pediatrician, because you don't want to let it go on. You want whatever the problem is to be identified so some kind of treatment can be started. Okay. One thing that you're going to be teaching as you go through your pre-K and beyond is semantics. Please know the meaning of semantics. Semantics refers to the meaning of language, the meaning of words, semantics. Please know this. It's on the OSAT. Another word that you're going to have to be very familiar with, pragmatics. Pragmatics is the ways in which people use and interpret language in context. And pragmatics tends to throw people off. It's very difficult for young children to understand pragmatics, and certainly difficult for English language learners. Here, let me show you a little bit of pragmatics. Easy as pie. Well, think to yourself, you are a person that just moved here from Sweden and you're learning English. And someone says to you, oh, you'll have no problem with that. It's easy as pie. Well, you may know what easy means, and you know that pie is something delicious to eat, but you're sitting there wondering, well, why is that? What does pie have to do with being easy? That is a cultural, pragmatics are culturally based statements that have a certain meaning. Like, for instance, if you've just come here from, Germany, and you're learning English, and someone says, oh, it's hot in here, please go crack the window. You're looking around like, they want me to throw something through the window and put a crack in it? Really? Again, it's a culturally constructed meaning. Very, very difficult for people who are not English language speakers to understand until they become more familiar with the language. And also something that young children have to learn, It doesn't come naturally. Same thing with a statement like, I'm beat. Oh, I'm beat. Well, who beat you up? Yeah, okay. You see where I'm going with this. Know the difference between semantics and pragmatics. Pragmatics is culturally constructed. Okay. And you can do all kinds of activities. This is one that we did in class where we played. This is a pragmatics type of role play where you would have 3 different ways you're going to role play. How are you feeling? Just that simple statement. If a stranger, you're at Walmart and you're paying the cashier and she says, how are you? I'm fine. Okay. Now, if your doctor asks you, how are you feeling? Oh, my head hurts and my stomach hurts. And so my big toe is sore. You see where I'm going with this. And if a friend asks you, again, completely different. Those are socially constructed statements. They're part of pragmatics. So I know if for those of you who've looked further ahead in the syllabus than this week, you know that in week 6, you're going to be creating a video where you're teaching an oral language activity. But I wanted to show you an oral language activity that I like, because when I'm teaching pre-K and kindergarten, and that's where you're hammering in on oral language. Having storybooks is a wonderful way to practice oral language. And I did this all the time. The Carl books by Alexandra Day are such a great way to do that. And there's tons of them out there, and you can get all kinds of picture books. You don't just have to get Carl, but Carl's just such a cute dog. I like to use Carl. Anyway, I would open the book up and we would talk about, just as a class, what do you think is happening on this page? And then I would eventually get to each child, and each child would get to tell me something that's happening on each page. And you can do this as a group activity. If you're teaching kindergarten, you can give each group a book and then have them as a group go through it together, just the 4 or 5 of them, and talk. What do you think's happening here? What do you think's happening there? It's a great way to begin group activities. So anyhow, just a suggestion. And when you go to your Oklahoma Academic Standards, I'm just going to get out of that and go back up here so we can. Okay. And you can see these are your kindergarten standards, and these are your speaking. This is oral language. When you see speaking, and you do have quite a few here, there's 4 of them. That's all you're addressing when you're teaching an oral language lesson. So next week, when you're actually doing an oral language activity, I will have the website for you, and you're going to go and pull off whatever your lesson is addressing. But we'll talk more about that next week when you're actually working on that. Okay, we go back to, there we go. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was second language acquisition. I can tell you that when you're going to have children in your classroom who are English language learners, and they're going to be scared to death. I speak from personal experience because I too am an English language learner. And when I got to school in 1st grade, I could not speak any English. And it was one of the most frightening episodes of my life. I still remember it. It was a long time ago, but you don't forget stuff like that. because you don't understand what's going on around you. You cannot ask a question. You can't tell anybody you have got to go to the bathroom. You just wait until they send you out to go. You don't know when you're going to lunch because you can't tell time and you can't ask. So it is a helpless feeling, and it is a time that's very stressful. I say that to all of you who are going to have English language learners in your classroom. Please try to communicate with them by learning a few words, some important words in their language. You might consider getting some flashcards that have things like food, water, and bathroom on them, so that the child might hold up a card if they really need to go. I'm just to make them a little bit more comfortable. So there is a whole cycle of second language acquisition. You begin with the nonverbal time, because that is when they're taking it all in. It's that receptive language. They're starting with receptive language all over again. They're not speaking it, though. It's completely nonverbal. And then you go into the telegraphic or formulaic language acquisition period. And this is just like when a toddler begins by saying one word and then maybe hooking two words together. This is the same thing. They're pointing out and saying environmental print. They might say Coke or Pepsi or McDonald's or Walmart. They'll be able to say the alphabet, and they'll be able to say their numbers, because it's memorized. And from there, they go to the formulaic acquisition, and this is where they can interact in social situations. They're able to hook two or three words together. They can ask to go to the bathroom, and so on and so forth. They can tell you if they don't feel good. And then we get to the productive use of new language, and this is really about 2 years down the road. And this is where they name objects, they speak in complete sentences, they're raising their hand, they're answering questions, all is good. And finally, about 1 to 2 years later, from that first period where they're using this new language productively, they are completely fluent. It's like nothing ever happened. And hopefully they have retained their original language so that now they're completely fluent in two. There are individual differences, though, in how children learn language. For one thing, exposure is a huge thing. You know, how much English are they exposed to during the day? I know there are different ways of thinking about English language learners and how to accommodate them in the classroom. Some schools put all the English language learners in one class, and then I think that really slows down their English learning. I think the best way to do it, and this is just personal experience now since I am one, I think that having English language learners in class with native English speakers is the best way, because they are so immersed in the language that they really do pick it up very quickly. And I really do think the younger children pick it up even faster than the older children. That's just personal experience. Make sure that when you have English language learners, and this is really good for all your young children, you have lots of hands-on objects. And I included the ladle here because back when I was teaching first grade, and I had probably out of 25, I probably had 6 or 7 English language learners. And one day we were reading a story about a ladle, and no matter what I tried, I just couldn't make them understand, my English language learners, what a ladle was. I tried so hard. I was doing, this, and I was making all the signs and all that, just couldn't do it. Anyway, so the next day I brought in my big red soup ladle, and they were like, oh yeah. And one little girl who spoke Mandarin, she was telling us what it was in Mandarin. And then I had several children who spoke Spanish, and they told me what it was in Spanish. And I had a little girl who was Hmong, and she told me what it was in Hmong in her language. I thought, oh, well, this is fantastic. You know, having the real item, at least it was meaningful to everyone now. So another thing, obviously, you'll want to do is use your word wall. I recommend a word wall no matter what class you have. It's a wonderful way for children to look up and see what you're working on. However, if you have a lot of English language learners, for the nouns that are up there, I recommend having a small picture. You might use personal dictionaries. Closed sentences are a great way as they're becoming more savvy with reading English. You can close sentences, C-L-O-Z-E. You may see this on a test someday, are sentences that have a blank spot, and then the child gets to insert the correct word. Sort of like a fill in the blank test, close sentences. You can try word sorts, word generation, like give me a list of fruit. Graphic organizers are a great way. You can record text. You know, if you're doing a story of the week, you can record it so that they can listen to you read it over and over. You can jigsaw text so it's in smaller pieces. I recommend a longer wait time for everybody, because this is a big gripe of mine, is wait time is such a big deal in class. You know, teachers don't like quiet. I've noticed that. And sometimes, you know, you ask a question and there's one or two that are like, oh, yeah, call me. But you're looking around and there's always several that are not. And they're generally girls. And research tells us that girls need a longer wait time than boys, because girls are much less likely to just jump out and offer an answer. So give them, say, I'm glad you know, do this if you know. And then when we're ready, I will call on somebody who's doing this. So that might be something that you could try, using pictures and demonstrations. Excellent way to teach language. So unfortunately, sometimes English language learners lose their home language, which is terrible. So I always say, encourage children to maintain, and their families, encourage them to maintain those languages, because it's wonderful to speak two languages. I continue to be fluent in my language, and it's a great way to communicate with relatives that you don't see very often. You lose a lot of support from family when you lose that home language. So encourage them to keep it up. All right, there you go. This PowerPoint is on your Blackboard page. I'm going to go ahead and get out of that and out of that. And there, we're good with that. Now let me go to Blackboard. Okay. So this week, you're going to read Bredicamp 408 through 424, and hopefully watch this video. Here's the PowerPoint, and you're going to complete content review number 2. I also encourage you to look around for good pre-K oral language activities. You know, just search the internet, look through your reading books, look through any teacher activity things that you have. You know, some of the great ways to teach oral language is by having children make up stories to go with picture books. Rhyming games are great. Finger plays are wonderful. Nursery rhymes and singing songs, all great ways to teach oral language. And there are many, many, many more. I'm just giving you a few of my favorites. you can just start thinking about it. Next week, we'll talk much more about the oral language activity. Have a wonderful week. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. Bye.